Anneliese Dodds, welcome to Acting Prime Minister, and thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I can see that you are in your famous loft in Oxford, which went viral this year when your daughter, wasn't it, bounced into the room mid-interview on Sky News. I assume the kids are at school today, are they?
They are, yeah. That was a very embarrassing moment. I thought she was still asleep, actually, and then, yes, kind of felt this little hand, and then she went under the chair. So, yes, just one of those moments, I think, really.
What's it been like having the kids at home during lockdown when you've been, discussing the nation's finances? I mean, it must be quite hard to do your job and to be looking after two little ones at the same time.
My partner's been absolutely brilliant during this period, and he's just been so committed to helping with childcare. I mean, he always is, but I feel so lucky compared to lots of other people. I mean, I've got friends who are in really small little flats and houses without gardens and that kind of thing, and I think that must have got really hard.
Yeah, because you're in Oxford where there's lots of sort of nice parks and green space, and yeah, I agree with you. I'm lucky to have a garden too, and I can't imagine what it must be like living in a flat during lockdown. It must be really, really difficult. Anyway, we're going to give you a new home on this podcast. The whole point is that we put you in 10 Downing Street for half an hour, and let's make you Prime Minister now. And we always like to get our guests settled into Downing Street before we begin. So you just walked through that big black door, and you're settling down to read through your red box. What is the drink that you think you might pour yourself to, ease yourself into the job and get yourself relaxed?
Ooh, I mean, I'm a bit of a coffee fiend, so I suppose it depends what time of day it is when I start reading those papers. But I do like a bit of a double espresso. I'm afraid it's my addiction, really. I do really love coffee. I stopped when I had my kids, but I'm well back on the wagon again now.
How many coffees do you get through a day?
Yeah, it's about 3. Yeah,
that's not too
probably
bad.
Need to scale it down. Yeah, well, but 3 strong ones,
okay.
3 proper ones.
3 double espressos, yeah. That's like 6, really.
It is really. It's not very good for me, to be honest with you. I suppose if it was later in the evening, although I'd have to be quite careful it wasn't too strong. But I do like kind of real ale, like hoppy real ales, but I'm not sure I'd want to be involved in that on the job, to be honest. I don't think that'd be a very good idea.
No, it's probably not a good habit to get into every time you have a stressful moment, because there are many stressful moments, I'd imagine, in that job. What is the one personal item that you take from home to give you some sort of comfort as you go into number 10?
Oh, that's a lovely question. It's almost a kind of desert island style question, isn't it? Goodness. I'd probably take, this sounds a bit kind of schmaltzy, but I'd probably take some of my kids' pictures to put on the wall, and just hope people don't think that it's me kind of expressing my innermost thoughts, because then they might have an interesting view about my psychology as a result of that. But I think I'd probably take some of my kids' pictures that they've done before, because it's really nice to look at them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a nice answer. And last but not least, who is the first person that you'd call, do you think, when you get into number 10? Who's the person you'd want to pick up the phone to immediately? It can be anyone. It doesn't have to be a politician, but it could be a personal, relative, friend, world leader, whatever you want.
Oh, wow. Literally anybody. That's a very exciting question. Who would I choose? Who would I want to speak to? I mean, we were very lucky, actually, during this period. We've had a lot of contact with our sister parties for the Labour Party. And we had one call with Jacinda Ardern, and that was obviously very interesting. I think she's a very interesting person, very clear communicator. So it'd be interesting, I suppose, to swap stories with her, really, about her role and how she's doing.
Okay, Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, that'd be a good one. Okay, let's talk a bit now about your path to power as Prime Minister. So you were born in Aberdeen and you went to the same private school as Michael Gove. You studied PP at Oxford, and then you became an academic in public policy. You can feel free to correct any of this, by the way, because it all comes from the internet. You were only elected in 2017 as the MP for Oxford East, and pretty quickly joined John McDonnell's Shadow Treasury team, before then being promoted by Keir Starmer this year to run the Shadow Treasury team as Shadow Chancellor yourself. So you have had a very quick rise in terms of frontline politics, and people might not have come across you as much as they're coming across you now in your new job. So I guess it's quite a tricky question, but how would you describe yourself to someone who doesn't know much about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually one of those people who doesn't talk so much about themselves, so it kind of feels quite strange culturally, really. I suppose in terms of how I hope people might view me, I hope that they would view me as someone who is committed, who really tries to do the right thing. Somebody who's empathetic. I do always try and look at situations through other people's eyes and understand what they're going through. It's really important to me. And I suppose someone who's determined as well. I guess if I had to pick out 3 attributes, that's certainly how I would like people to view me.
And was there anything about your childhood in Aberdeen that kind of drew you to politics, do you think?
I mean, I didn't come from a political family at all. So my parents kind of, I suppose my mother's side to an extent it could have been described maybe as kind of small C conservative. So kind of fishing background, and then ran a small shop. And then my mother was the first person with her brother to go to university from the family. And then my father's side, I suppose, was a bit more eclectic, and they'd lived for some time in Manchester as well as in the northeast of Scotland. I mean, I suppose in terms of me becoming politically minded, I guess my first experiences of work slightly influenced me. My first job was as a kitchen porter, washing dishes, which, I mean, it was actually quite good fun, although I did end up dreaming of washing dishes, which was quite a strange experience.
That was my first job as well, actually, funnily enough. And I was I was so bad at it, I got sacked. I was really bad at washing dishes, really, really bad. I mean, that's humiliating, really, but I assume you weren't sacked and you were better at it than I was, but...
Yeah, I'm really astonished to hear that you could be bad. Anyway, never mind. But no. But it's I suppose, speaking very, very seriously about it, back at that time, I obviously had quite a lot of friends who were involved in the catering industry. And whereas for me, this was just something that I could do kind of, on top of school, really. For a lot of them, that was what they had to rely on for their income. And it was really, really tough. And that was back in the times before there was a minimum wage. And, I did start thinking at that stage, I suppose, about fairness in the workplace, those kinds of matters. And then when I did go to university, I was very well aware of the fact that, access to university, obviously I went to Oxford University, so it applies even more there, but that, it's not open to all those people who should be able to access the incredible resources that are available in Oxford or indeed in other universities. So that issue about access is one that I care really passionately about. And it's one of the reasons why I did go on to work as a lecturer and then senior lecturer for many years, because, I can see the power of education and how much people can benefit from it and how many people aren't able currently to access it that need to be able to.
And you're obviously from Scotland, I'm from Wales, and I think people who are from a home nation other than England do sometimes get that kind of nagging feeling to go home to one of those nations. And Scotland is fascinating politically at the moment, and there's a lot of jeopardy actually in politics, no matter which side you're on in Scotland at the moment. There are high stakes. Have you not been tempted to be drawn back to Scotland and to take part in that kind of political fight?
Well, home for me is Oxford. It's where we're based. I've lived here for a long time. My kids go to school here. My partner definitely wouldn't want to move anywhere else either. I wouldn't want to be anywhere other than this city. I love this place. Of course, I care about what happens in Scotland. No question about that, as well as the rest of the UK. But yeah, Oxford's home.
Okay, well, home is now Downing Street, don't forget. So let's get down to your work as Prime Minister. And we assume that you're in Downing Street right now at this very moment, and the country clearly is being gripped by a second wave of COVID-19. The Chancellor announced this week his latest economic measures as part of his winter economic plan to deal with some of these scenarios. What is that? What is it in simple terms that you think you would do differently to the Chancellor's announcements this week, particularly about protecting jobs?
Well, the very first thing that I would want to do would be to work very hard indeed on why the test, trace and isolate system in the UK is not working as it should do. And I appreciate some people might say, well, that's not an economic question, but actually it is in the UK. The fact that we are unfortunately behind lots of other countries on those public health measures clearly has led to additional restrictions being imposed. It's reducing people's confidence about, everything from going into a business to investing if they run a business. So that public health crisis must be got a grip on. So I would want, every single day I'd want to have updates on what's going on with test, trace and isolate in particular, have a much stronger grip on the contracts being used to deliver this. I mean, Chancellor said earlier this week that £12 billion has been spent on that system, but it's not working as it needs to. So that would be the absolute first thing that I would do, because it underlines everything else. It's the undergird for everything else. But secondly, I would be taking different choices right now, because the UK is at a pivot point now. Either we accept to an extent that we're headed towards 1980s style levels of unemployment, or we don't accept that outcome and we do much more to try to prevent those levels of unemployment. I've said we need to work to recover jobs, retrain workers and rebuild businesses. And I do think there are different choices that can be made around all three, and that would protect people at this difficult time.
The thing that the Chancellor said yesterday was that it's not up to him to decide which jobs are viable, because I guess the government kind of admits that jobs will probably be lost. The Chancellor's been quite honest, saying he can't protect every single job. And that kind of seems reasonable, doesn't it? I mean, should we be propping up jobs that perhaps won't exist after the pandemic because things have changed so much?
But in those circumstances, we need to ensure that people who do become unemployed can very, very quickly get back into work, that they can access the training that they need and they can get the opportunities to be back in the workplace. And unfortunately, that's not there currently in the UK. The Chancellor, he only mentioned the word training once in passing in his speech, unfortunately. Now, there's a lot that can be done around that. A lot of money that's already been allocated for the future by government into training. It's not being spent now. That needs to be sorted out. Our colleges are standing ready, further education standing ready to help in this, but they haven't been called on to the extent that needs to happen. And we also are in a situation where, if you compare the UK's environmental stimulus, for example, to that of other countries, it's very, very far behind, unfortunately. And that's a big problem, because that's impacting on business confidence, because, for example, in aerospace, you've got big employers looking at what's happening in the UK, comparing it to, say, France or Germany, and thinking, well, other countries are more ambitious, so we won't be keeping jobs in this country. So, of course, lots of jobs have already been lost, but we need to act to prevent more going in the weeks and months to come. And, in many cases, we're talking about sectors that are viable. They're viable for the future. They're going to be really important for our country in the future as we recover. If they get knocked out now or knocked down now, that recovery will be a lot harder.
I suppose the question, though, is whether you do accept that this pandemic will change the face of our economy, it will change the face of employment forever, and whether you are willing to forego any jobs. Is it a case that you agree with the Chancellor that some jobs will have to go, or is Labour saying every single job should be saved?
Well, I think it's very obvious that the economy is changing, it's transforming rapidly, and actually what this crisis is doing in many instances is accelerating that transition. If we think about the shift towards working from home, for example, if you think about some of the changes rather that are occurring in aviation, and the fact that there do need to be changes in that industry because of the climate crisis. But the big question is, how can we ensure that change is a planned change, a change which doesn't cause wanton destruction pretty much of jobs and livelihoods, where we do accept, and I do accept there will be change. I do accept there will be people who are in jobs now who will need to be in different jobs in the future. I fully accept that. But we need to make sure that people aren't left to cope with that on their own, that they're not left to sink or swim on their own. The problem with what's happening now is we've got this major dislocation, but with lots and lots of people, lots of businesses pretty much having to deal with the consequences without very much help at all so that they can face up to them. And that, I think, is very problematic. And it will cost us in the long run. It'll cost us because it's reducing our economic capacity. So it will reduce our ability to recover in the future.
One of the big things that the Chancellor faced in his decision-making is whether or not to scrap the triple lock on pensions, which I think is quite a totemic issue for a lot of people in younger generations, because we've seen pensions rise by at least 2.5% as part of the triple lock, when younger people in work haven't necessarily seen their wages rise to the same degree. Now we're seeing potentially mass unemployment in the country. So it's going to be a tough question for you too. I mean, is it something that you think is sustainable, that triple lock, to see older generations continually have their living standards rise while younger generations stagnate?
I think there are two different things that are muddled up in the debate around the triple lock. There are immediate questions, which are around how it's calculated, and without going into the kind of technical side of it, although I'm sure that people listening to this will be aware of this, obviously that the triple lock means that one element of that is about the extent to which the average wage, put rather simply, has increased. Now, clearly, we've been in a situation where lots of people's hours have been really substantially depressed. They've been on the furlough scheme, etc. When they're going back into work, then we'd anticipate seeing really quite a big jump in their wage. Now, the government has kind of mixed up that factor, which will make it harder for the triple lock as written on paper to work in the short term. They seem to have kind of muddled that up with longer term issues around the triple lock. But the thing is, they did say at the last general election that they would stick to that triple lock into the future. It was a manifesto commitment that they set out. I would anticipate if the Labour Party was elected at the next general election, which I really, really hope it will be, that people would expect us to stick to our manifesto commitments at that stage. I think that the Conservatives need to be open about what they're talking about here. Are they talking about those short-term technical issues where, I think a number of us would have some sympathies with them, or are they talking about the long-term or, medium to long-term future of the triple lock? And there, they need to stick to what they promised at the last general election.
There was also a Labour conference this week, which went slightly under the radar, understandably, because we're in the middle of a pandemic. But the big push from Keir Starmer was that Labour is under new leadership. How do you think this leadership, in your experience, differs from Jeremy Corbyn's leadership?
I mean, I think that everything has had to change because the whole world has changed. I mean, we're clearly in the middle of a crisis that's turned everything upside down. It's turned things absolutely upside down in really awful ways for so many people, and the challenges faced by any political party, frankly, fade into insignificance compared to the challenges faced by others. So, we are in a very, very different context. There are many policy areas where, we're in a very different place. I think the public debate has changed a lot around issues like low pay, for example, treatment of workers like social care workers. I think there's a widespread recognition, awareness now of the unfairness of a system where people just cannot survive on the kind of wage that they would be receiving as a social care worker. It's obviously got to change for the future. And so many other things, I think, that are revealed from this crisis. So it is a very different context that we're facing now.
And the context is different. I agree with you on that. But what is it about the leadership style, do you think? When he says that Labour's under new leadership, what does that mean?
Well, I think it means an honesty about the fact that we haven't just lost the last general election, we've lost 4. So we really do have to change. We need to understand why people turned away from us, wherever they are in the UK. We need to have that open conversation with them. Keir's been doing that. I've been doing that as well. Been doing it in person when that was possible, doing it remotely when it's not. Understanding people's circumstances and what they're going through, what needs to change. I think that's very important. I think also dealing with a number of those issues that Keir spoke about in his speech, anti-Semitism and other matters, where, we really needed to move forward as a party and understand why people were rightly very unhappy with what had been happening previously. We need to do something about those matters and do so speedily. So I think that is new leadership. It's that new decisive leadership, dealing with those problems, being on people's side and being open to what they're saying to us.
Because you've been in both shadow teams under Jeremy Corbyn and under Keir Starmer. Does it feel different to you?
Well, I wasn't in the shadow cabinet previously. I was a junior shadow minister, so a slightly different situation. As I said, I think that, everything is different because the context is completely different. We've had our shadow cabinet meetings over Zoom. Everything has been really very, very different because of the nature of the crisis. We're a new team. I'm really pleased that we've got people involved from right across the country. Real talent there, I think, from right across the Labour Party, working very closely, obviously, with trade unions, with other stakeholders, with our Welsh teams, our Scottish teams, and indeed with local government and our Metro mayors. So, I think that kind of really strong Labour team is something that seems to be working very well right now.
I just think it's interesting that the big message is sort of under new leadership, but nobody seems to want to criticise the old leadership. And at some point, you're going to have to be really honest about the differentiation, aren't you? And say, this is what we stand for now, and make it clear that is a break with the past. I suppose Keir Starmer did do it a little bit by talking about the patriotism that he feels for the country, which some perceive Jeremy Corbyn's leadership as lacking. Do you feel able to go any further and tell me what the difference really is between Keir Starmer and Jeremy Corbyn's leadership?
Well, I think with respect, we've just been talking about it. Above all, there is that honesty and openness to understand where we may have gone wrong before. And, I'm very well aware that people often on the ground didn't feel that Labour was speaking for them. They didn't feel that we were connected to the issues that mattered to them. Particularly economically, they often weren't viewing Labour as the solution to their problems. They didn't feel that we were in touch with the real issues that their family was facing, their communities were facing. And that's got to change. And this is a very deep-rooted thing. As Keir set out, it's not just about the last one election, it's about the last four, where it's been revealed that, we haven't been in the right place. And we need to change. And I think we are doing that, right across the party. We've got a new general secretary for the party as well. I think there's a real thirst among our members to be involved in that. Obviously, we've got very large membership as a political party. And I'm really determined that we get to that place where people do view Labour as the solution.
And Keir Starmer said himself this week that, he doesn't want to commit now to policies ahead of the general election, which is still 4 years away. But in general terms, do you think that you will be committing to the same level of public spending as John McDonnell did as Shadow Chancellor? Because that was what led to questions among many in the public about Labour's viability as a government in waiting, was whether they would spend unrealistic amounts of money. Do you think maybe some of those policies need to be pared back a bit?
Well, look, Paul, for me, the core thing is that, and the core criterion is that we ensure that public spending ultimately is focused on delivering outcomes for people that make their lives better, their families' lives better, their communities function more effectively, that make people feel more secure. And so they believe that they're, part of a fairer society. That's what's most important. And I think that's going to be even more important as we come out of this crisis. But, it does put those questions around public spending in perspective, I think. We've seen the lack of resilience of our public services being revealed, sadly, in spades during this crisis. We've also seen the lack of resilience of household incomes, unfortunately, being revealed through this as well. So actually, I think we need to have much more of a focus on people's particularly on household incomes, what can be done to try and improve that for the future. Some of these real deep structural problems with our labour market that have meant we're so ill prepared for a crisis like this. We will have to develop policy in that area. It'll need to take into account new modes of working that are accelerating rapidly, the kind of platform economies that we see that very often are just about flexibility for a very, very large company and no flexibility at all for the employee. A lot will have to change into the future. There's no question about that.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of the other things that would be on your plate as Prime Minister rather than as Shadow Chancellor. And obviously you'd be dealing, again, with this pandemic and enforcing some of these social distancing rules. And you represent a city with lots of students in it. Do you think it's fair that younger people are being portrayed at the moment as flouting the rules?
Well, actually, it's been really interesting in Oxford because my office has been inundated with emails from students saying, look, the ones who you might have seen videos of, congregating in large groups, they don't represent us. The vast majority of us are following the rules. We are sticking to what we've been asked to do. We really want to protect particularly the vulnerable. So I think that the general image that young people aren't taking care, I don't think that's fair on those who really are trying hard to stick within these restrictions. Well, I think these are really difficult circumstances for students, as they are for so many people in the UK. And obviously, if it did come to that, that would be really, really hard for a lot of students. But ultimately, this virus, it's not like a freak weather event or something like that, although arguably some people would say that some of those do have a cause from the climate crisis. It's not an act of God. What's happening right now with this virus in the UK, the fact that we are seeing, unfortunately, really quite substantially increased numbers of infections. We can't forget about the fact that that is linked to the lack of an effective test, trace and isolate system. Other countries have seen their schools going back, they've seen university students coming back in many cases, and they have managed to actually contain different local flare-ups much more effectively than we've managed to do in the UK. So we've got to get that test, trace and isolate system working.
And everyone's being asked right now whether they would be willing to tell on a neighbour, to dob in a neighbour and report a neighbour for breaking the rules. Do you think that's something that you feel able to do?
I always think that the personal touch is the best one. And when I've been in situations previously, if I think something isn't right, then I'll kind of have a quiet word with the person. I was in a situation at one point where I thought a business probably wasn't following the rules. I wasn't totally sure, but I contacted local environmental health so they could go and have a discussion with that business, and then that got sorted out. So they were totally clear about what the rules were. I think often informally we can deal with these kinds of issues, before it has to get to a stage of kind of formal enforcement. But obviously, if the latter is required, then it's required, and we need to make sure that we are all sticking to those restrictions.
Okay, well, look, we're running out of time and we've had quite a detailed discussion about all sorts of policies, which has been great, but let's do some quick fire questions just to finish off, which we always throw at people. Where would you go on holiday as Prime Minister? Where's your kind of favourite place to go? Where would you be snapped by the paps, relaxing in loafers or whatever it is that Prime Ministers wear?
Well, over the summer, I did a tour of the UK, which was absolutely fabulous. I really, really enjoyed it. Went to Northern Ireland, obviously, the South Coast, Midlands, Scotland. I suppose where I would really want to be next summer would be probably able to visit the Edinburgh Festival and for the festival to actually be happening, because I think that's what we all want. We all want to get back to normality, and I really want to see those jobs returning, in particular, right across the country. So that's the picture that I would want to see, to be honest, next year. Lots and lots of people together enjoying themselves like we were able to previously.
Don't tell me you missed out Wales on your summer tour.
Oh goodness, no, I didn't. Oh crikey, I certainly didn't. Thank you for. In fact, my partner would be very upset because he's half Welsh actually, and we did spend quite a bit of time in North Wales, in particular, and visited a number of the attractions there, and also some of the real incredible industrial innovation that's going on there as well.
Okay, good. I'm relieved to hear that. Which song would you dance to at party conference? Have you got a favourite song?
Oh, now that's a very good question, because this came up recently, actually, when I was thinking about what kind of introduction music I wanted. And my favourite song is Blue Monday by New Order, but it was suggested to me it might not necessarily send out the right signal, saying that I really like a song that's got the word blue in the title. But I like my dance music. You see, that's what I really like. I'm afraid I'm a child of the late 1990s from that point of view, mid to late 1990s.
What kind of dance music are you into? Are we talking techno? Or are we talking house? Are we? Really?
Yes, and house and all that kind of thing. Yeah, Shaman onwards. Absolutely. Yeah, love it.
I think you're the first guest we've had on that likes house music. That's interesting. What would your Downing Street pet be? What animal would you take into Downing Street, do you think?
Ooh, well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I always had dogs when I was young. My kids are constantly trying to get us to agree to having one, but then I say to them, "Well, come on, guys, you'd have to walk it every day," and then the enthusiasm fades a little bit. But if I could be sure that I would be able to treat it properly, then yes, a dog. If I'd be able to give it enough walks so that it was happy.
And lastly, we always ask everyone on the podcast, would you actually ever want to be Prime Minister, do you think?
If I'm completely honest, I don't think I would want to be Prime Minister. I really would want to be involved at a senior level around economic questions. They're the ones that I'm really interested in, particularly how we can boost people's living standards into the future. So yeah, that really is where my passion lies and what I would want to be working on.
Does something put you off about being Prime Minister? Because it does put some people off. Maybe it's the level of scrutiny or the personal life being dragged into politics. Is there something that puts you off?
I mean, I suppose I feel that, in a role like I'm in currently, it's possible to be, very strongly engaged with policy questions, to have that kind of a focus, a forensic focus on different questions. I think it's quite difficult for a Prime Minister to do that, obviously, because of the breadth of what they have to cover. So that would probably be why, but also above all, it's because I want Keir to be Prime Minister into the future. That's really what I want to see, genuinely. Very diplomatic. That's a good answer. Okay. All right, Anneliese Dodds, thanks so much for coming on Acting Prime Minister. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.